Thank you everyone for coming today. Welcome to the June Forum of the Oregon City Business Alliance. In case you are wondering, the Oregon City Business Alliance is a group of businesses and individuals working to encourage, promote, and support a positive and sustainable economic development in Oregon City and Clackamas County generally. We host these forums to educate businesses, elected officials, and the voting public generally about economic and other issues of import for our community. And we'd like to thank you for joining us today to hear from our distinguished guests from Metro. Please allow me to introduce our panel, who will be sharing lots of interesting information, although I think for most of us, they need no introduction, although I'll do it anyway. Joining us as our lead speaker is Metro Council President Lynn Peterson. She leads the nation's only elected regional government representing over 1.7 million Oregonians in the Portland area. She is a transportation and land use expert with degrees in engineering and planning. She served in Salem as a senior advisor to Governor Kitzhaber, served as the director of the Washington State Department of Transportation, and I will note, although it's not in her listed bio, on the Clackamas County Commission, which was a great experience for many of us. Under her leadership, Metro is expanding into several key areas of concern for our region, including affordable housing and the response to the homeless crisis, which is a topic we will be covering today.
Hold your applause until the end.
Yes, we've muted all of you for a reason. Following that, we will be able to hear from Representative Christine Lewis, Councilor Christine Lewis, who represents our communities in District 2 to Metro. She serves on a host of acronyms such as MPAC, MERC, the Willamette Falls Locks Commission, the Willamette Falls Partnership Group, the Oregon Zoo Foundation Board, the Community Placemaking Advisory Committee, and many other activities trying to make sure that our communities are great places for us to live, work, and play. She has over a decade of experience in state and local government policy and advocacy roles, and immediately prior to her time on the council, served as the legislative director at the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. And wrapping up, although I have to admit that I did not receive a full bio, is Director of Government Affairs for Metro, Andy Shaw, who has a host of experience working with local governments and helping people understand the challenges of policies and issues as they work throughout the region. So with that, I will ask people to observe the presentation that they'll be leading. You will note that there is the opportunity to submit questions. We have a moderator here, Renata Mendelberg, who will be able to facilitate that question so we can have a nice coordinated response and get a nice, smooth flow of information. So if you have those questions, instead of putting them in the chat, please put them into the question queue. And with that, Lynn Peterson, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you so much to the Oregon City Chamber. Much appreciated. It is an honor to be here with you today. I really appreciate your time and attention to these big topics. I know this virtual room well and appreciate the volunteer work and care that you all put into your city. Oregon City and Clackamas County are key in the economic development of the region. You are strategically positioned, and we want to work together with you toward the betterment of all people in Clackamas as well as the region through the 5-year Economic Recovery Plan and transportation and workforce initiatives to provide family wage jobs in this region. Your Main Street approach has been recognized nationally. Your place in history is an important part of the story of our region and our state, and it will play an important role going forward in reconciling the impacts of colonialism and racial discrimination. It will play an important role in building out both new community developments at the edge inside the urban reserves, as well as the industrial land infill that can still take place in the Clackamas County industrial area. And it will play an important role in showcasing how new development in your urban core with the Grand Round ownership of the Blue Heron site integrates in with your Main Street approach. We stand ready to work with you on these things. Never in the history of the region has Clackamas County had a council that had such strong leadership from Clackamas County, nor the intimate understanding of the gem that sits in the southeast portion of our region. I have been so impressed and honored to work with Councilor Lewis. Her background and expertise are a perfect match for where Clackamas County and the region stand today. You have never been better represented at the regional table. Councilor Lewis and Andy Shaw, Public and Government Relations Director, joined me today to give you an update on where a couple of the key elements of building back better and keeping our promises the two big themes that really motivated our budget going forward into the next fiscal year. On keeping our promises, I will give you an update on the affordable housing measure and supportive housing service measure. Councillor Lewis will then take us through an update on the Willamette Falls project. And under the Building Back Better, Andy Shaw will walk us through what we have learned and where we are going on past and future transportation conversations. And then we will open up for questions. But first, Councillor Lewis, is there anything else you would like to add? There she is.
Yes, thank you so much, Council President Peterson. And I'm really glad my camera was turned off for me so you couldn't see me blush for that, for those kind words. One of the things that I love about Metro is we get to work on things that really matter to people, like making sure that we have a safe and beautiful place to live, that we have garbage that gets picked up and moved out of the region efficiently and effectively, and that we can be part of making sure that we have emergency response. Just this past Saturday, I was able to be at the Oregon Convention Center for the last day of vaccine distribution on site through 4 of our state's largest healthcare providers. And I'm really proud of the work that we did at Metro over this past year to step up, to use our facilities, our resources, to some extent, our academic knowledge, and put it to true use. And the vaccine distribution is kind of hallmark of that work. We also went through a lot in some of our other venues, like the zoo and the Expo Center and Portland 5 performing arts venues. And we were really innovative and creative and got the zoo back online before a lot of other visitor venues. But P5 won't be back online until the last week of August. So we're still in that recovery and reopening phase and have faced a lot of setbacks, just like a lot of private industry and hospitality and tourism. I say this not to be dour or down, but when Council President Peterson says build back better, we are doing our building back right as we're taking on some of the biggest challenges Metro's ever faced. As was noted in the introduction, Metro is the nation's only regionally elected government. And there are lots of regional governments, and they all do the same sort of work to make sure that as you're driving down the street, you don't have a street that goes from 1 lane to 5 lanes to 1 lane again, just because you cross over some arbitrary boundaries or borders. But you actually plan for that, and you actually plan to make sure that the amount of lanes there are what is needed, and for all the other infrastructure as well. And I like being regionally elected because it means that I go back to a set of people, a set of constituents who live in Oregon City and Happy Valley, Lake Oswego, and some of the smaller cities in our region. And I get to actually stand up and fight for Clackamas. And it's what I enjoy doing, even though it's not always easy. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is how special the Willamette Falls area is, but I would just say my entire district is special, because I have to say that, my whole district is special, but the heart of where we're making improvements in Clackamas County really is here in Oregon City. I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you for hosting us, and I will turn it back over to Council President Peterson, who will, get us going on the housing issues.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. And you just reminded me that we played a huge role during this last year in being able to use both the Expo Center and the Oregon Convention Center on behalf of the residents of Clackamas County when the fires hit. The Expo Center taking large rigs and allowing folks to evacuate their equipment up to Expo Center, and the Oregon Convention Center taking in folks that needed a safe place. So we welcome both at both venues, and they really played a major role in a lot of things during this pandemic. So we're very proud of them. All right, moving on, let's talk about both the Affordable Housing Bond Measure from 2018 and where we're at, and the Supportive Housing Service Measure from May of 2020. They work hand in hand, and as you'll recall, the Affordable Housing Bond Measure was a property tax bond of $652.8 million that the region passed at 67% when it passed at the ballot box. What it said, and what we said we would do with our 7 housing authorities, and Clackamas County is one of those housing authorities, is that we would be able to raise this money and get it out to those housing authorities so that they could provide at least 3,900 units of affordable and deeply affordable housing in this region. Now, we know that's only a drop in the bucket of what we need both from the private and the public sector going forward. Our study almost 6 to 7 years ago showed that we were 45,000 housing units short of affordable housing in this region. So the 3,900 units is certainly a step in the right direction, but the private sector, as we move through time, is going to have to pick up a lot of this. And obviously, as we're coming out of this pandemic and this recession, we're already starting to see some of that happen. But we do need a lot more housing in our region in order to be able to accommodate both our growth, but also the inaffordability of what we have. So the affordable bond measure, with those 7 housing authorities, we have committed over the last 2 years, 34% of those resources, which means that we have basically approved and moved out to the housing authorities the money to be able to either get ready for construction or go into construction over the last 2 years. And we have basically committed in the 34% of the money, 54% of the goal of 3,900 units. So if you're doing the math, we are way ahead of schedule in meeting that 3,900 units. The reason for that is twofold. One is that there has been very low interest rates on loans, and the nonprofit providers have been able to take advantage of the Biden administration tax credits for affordable housing. So with those two things combined, we have made a lot of progress. And many of those projects we will see in construction. There are about 20 projects making up half of that 3,900 unit goal. We believe that we are going to far exceed that goal. By how much, we're not sure. That will depend also on the cost of wood and labor going forward. But what we do know is that we will probably exceed that goal, which is good news for the region. And when we say we, I'm including those 7 housing authorities, including Clackamas County, in that we, because it is a joint we, it is a partnership that we have in order to get all of this out and on the ground. And we all know at Metro that it takes a lot of work to implement this out on the ground. And so we want to run alongside as partners in doing so. Very proud of all of the projects in Clackamas County, and looking forward to being able to see that make a real impact in people's lives, from the housing in Gladstone that folks are working on that are individual rooms with shared facilities so that people coming off the street can actually have a room. They don't need a whole apartment yet. To having families being able to come off the street or stop couch surfing, which is really bad for not only somebody who needs to access jobs, but also for the kids who really need to be stable in their home environment and where they're going to school. So very proud of that work. But then we in the region decided to ask us to do the supportive housing services measure in May of 2020. And that passed also by about 67%. And what that was supposed to do was functionally end chronic homelessness within 10 years. And it was a tax on high income people and high income businesses. And that was supposed to, in our projections, get to $250 million a year. We are not actually seeing that revenue come in yet because of the recession that we've been in through the pandemic, but we hope to see that come up as we, 1, get the tax going, and 2, our economy starts to come back to fruition. So we have, at this point in the process, because it's been it's been a year now, we have been working on 2 very important things. 1, in coordination with all 3 counties, including Clackamas County, getting their local implementation plan work going and an intergovernmental agreement in place on how to spend that money. Clackamas County has done a fabulous job just running forward and taking advantage of this opportunity to take care of folks both inside and outside the urban growth boundary. Very much appreciate all of the work and the goals that have been set up to be able to achieve that functional ending of homelessness within the next 10 years. The measure supports rental assistance, mental and physical health, drug addiction, and also workforce training. So it is a complete package for folks that have fallen on hard times to be able to get themselves back up on their feet and going again. In round numbers, I think what we're seeing, and Councilor Lewis can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're seeing about 3,000 folks that will get services in the 3 counties. 3,000 more people will be able to get services if you combine all 3 counties' numbers. And I believe we're somewhere between about 600 and 750 new shelter beds if you combine all of them together. So it's a huge movement forward, and I'm very appreciative of all of that work. The other thing that we've been doing over the last year in conjunction with the city of Portland, because we contracted with them to actually do the taxation. So it took this year in order to be able to set up the tax and start collecting it. It was a great decision actually to go with the city of Portland, because the state of Oregon was going to take 3 to 4 years to actually get around to even set it up, and then would have cost us a lot more money. So it's a great partnership with the city of Portland to be able to get this up and going. So the money is starting to flow in. The 3 counties have now adopted local improvement plans that have gone through the required county oversight committee adoption, and then up to the metro oversight adoption. And then the council at Metro has adopted those local improvement plans. All 3 are now done and are being implemented, which is huge. And then we will finalize all that out with the intergovernmental agreements. So I would encourage you to talk to Clackamas County about their local implementation plan. There's a lot of meaty stuff in there that will help people as we come out of the pandemic. And a lot of folks are looking at the potential of eviction and back rent problems. So this is well-timed, and I'm glad that it passed when it did, and that it is there and available to folks as we move forward. And I think that's where I'll stop, except to say that the 2 measures actually are going to go hand in hand in order for us to be able to achieve higher results than we had hoped to achieve on either of those measures, because we're going to be able to use those rental assistance vouchers to help backstop a lot of the increase in affordable housing that will be able to be built. So thank you to all of our county partners and to everyone in the community who gave input to both of those measures. And we look forward to being able to come back and, in our role as Metro, give you the data and the trends and whether the counties have been doing what they said that they would do. And if there are reasons why they have over succeeded or are having problems, we will relate that to you. But very, very proud of what's been taking place. And I will turn it over to Councilor Lewis now to talk about Willamette Falls.
Great, thank you. Just a few more points to add on housing. First, I am rosy on the work that we're doing, because it's the first time the government has stepped forward to say we're going to put the money on the table intentionally and specifically focused on the hardest to house or the hardest folks to resolve their homelessness. So we've been able to demonstrate that some of these models work. Let's actually bring them to scale. One of the ways that we'll be able to know that we're doing it at the right level is because we have an oversight committee. And today in the attendee list, I can see him, but he's also asked a question. So he's okay to be known that he's here. But we've got Dan Fowler, who is one of Clackamas's 5 members on the oversight committee. No stranger to Oregon City. The area is well represented by a leader in our community, being a loud and vocal voice on our oversight committee, which meets at this point pretty much monthly. So lots of work getting up to speed and digging in on our county plans. So thank you, Dan, and thank you for indulging me talking about housing for just one more minute before I dive in on my part of the agenda. So Metro has designated Oregon City as a regional center under the 2040 Growth Concept Plan. It's a lot of planning lingo, a lot of Metro speak, but what it really means is that Oregon City has big goals for growth in population and employment in the area. Metro and local governments across Greater Portland have identified these places that we intend to grow. And we've obviously had to commit some resources to making sure that we are growing and developing in the right way and in productive ways to foster neighborhoods, to foster people being able to live close to where they work, and the other improvements that we know are necessary, like transportation. So, as part of the energy that's happening here in Oregon City and at the falls, we have a couple of things moving. One, we have some potential big transportation investments. We have the locks, having just had the public corporation bill pass at the state legislature. I've been serving on the locks commission for the past 2 years, and that's no small feat and a big deal for us to make sure that those locks can be reopened one of these days. And then finally, we're moving forward as a set of communities working with our federal delegation as a designated national heritage area. And creeping in the attendee list, I see Alice Norris, former mayor, lots of former mayors here today, who's been integral in those efforts. So Metro has definitely some interest in those areas, as well as the Willamette Falls Legacy Project itself, which is the cooperation of 4 government partners who have come together to bring resource to restoring access to the Willamette Falls on the Oregon City side. The 4 values that have been long established for how the group works together, the group being the state of Oregon, Clackamas County, Metro, and Oregon City, are historic and cultural interpretation, public access, healthy habitat, and economic redevelopment. We know that as the one site that's a complex site comes online for a healthy economy, the rest of downtown will feel the echo and the waves of impact. I'm a little bit of a newcomer to this project. The project was on board and online at Metro before my time, but in the past 2 years, I've seen the project grow and develop. And in particular, under the historic and cultural interpretation, we've had a real emphasis on making sure that Metro's engaging and the project is engaging with tribal interests who have historic and political ties to the falls and to the area. We have a lot of work to do in this field, and we've had some of these conversations come to a pointed point, in particular since the Confederate Tribes of the Grand Ronde has purchased the property. We're excited to move forward and partner with the Grand Ronde. And in fact, in early February, we were able to accept at the partners table the vision and the first phase concept. So we're in agreement about what the first phase of development will look like. Our partners will gather again together next week in order to consider how we move forward, in particular with the other tribes having brought forward letters asking for some time to have some engagement. I'm grateful for the opportunity to lead the community through these hard conversations. It's challenging to make sure that we stay focused on our values, but also recognize that this place has been a gathering point and a crossroads since time immemorial. And there are tribes who have been here long before these 4 white governments came up with things like easement rights and property rights. And we have work to do to make sure that we make this project right, and that as we move forward, we're not doing harm intentionally or unintentionally. So I remain committed, and in particular to the ecological restoration. That's how Metro is involved because of our investment in parks and open spaces. I've spent some time on the water at the falls over the last couple of days. It is cooler there. It is windy. It is beautiful. And I want public access for my son when he is grown up enough to go off on his own and have a place to gather. So I am optimistic that we are on the right track. I know things are moving at government speed, but we have the opportunity to do some real historic work here, not only in our consensus-driven process of 4 governments, but also to make sure that we are listening and inclusive of tribes, particularly since we have a tribe that is landowner of a place that is so meaningful and valuable to them. And we are going to have to really, lean into that word partner. we've got a partners table, and the question here is Metro able to be a partner? I believe we are. And with that, I believe I am to turn it over to Andy Shaw to go in on more details about some other work at Metro, but I can't help but bite at one of the questions in the chat. What is the current status of the Metro transfer station location? So I've just given a little bit update on one end of downtown Oregon City. I will say Metro is a significant landowner on the other end of downtown Oregon City. Metro South transfer station, it's popular, people love to go there. I've visited a few times during the pandemic myself as I've done home improvement projects, and we've outgrown that space. We have traffic onto the street, we have cross traffic within the site. So we are searching to make sure that we are able to build a modern transfer station on enough space. We can talk about it more in Q&A, but I didn't want to give up my time without stating my commitment to making sure that we take care of Metro South and making sure those services are available in the future for this part of the region. With that, Andy.
Well, thank you, Councilor Lewis and Council President Peterson. I'm happy to be with you all this afternoon to talk a bit about our efforts to invest in our transportation infrastructure. In particular, I wanted to talk about the transportation investment measure from last year. But first, just put it in a little bit of context. Metro works closely with our local governments to look at many different ways of funding transportation priorities. And we just this last year, in one area, have brought together local partners to put our best foot forward at the federal level as we're looking at potential significant transportation investments by the feds to ensure that we're bringing, shovel-ready projects forward for that funding. So we've been working very closely with local partners, including staff at Clackamas County, to prioritize and advance projects that are ready to go if and when it's finally infrastructure week at the federal level, and we see the adoption of more transportation infrastructure funding there. We also work very closely with our partners at the state level to advance funding interests and policy interests around transportation, and think we've had a pretty successful year this year trying to identify some additional planning funds for Clackamas priorities and advance the bottleneck funding that we all worked really hard for in House Bill 2017 a few years back. But moving to the transportation measure, we worked for 2 years plus trying to develop a broadly supported transportation proposal. We're very pleased with the work in Clackamas County in particular with our local investment team that came together to identify project priorities in key corridors in Clackamas County. In addition to deep work with staff at the cities and county in Clackamas and local leaders on the transportation task force to identify what ended up being nearly $750 million of investments along McLaughlin Boulevard, Clackamas to Columbia project with a new road connector on the east end of Happy Valley, Sunrise Highway 212 improvements, improvements in Highway 43, and improvements on the Clackamas portion of 82nd Avenue. All projects that came up through the local prioritization process, but also met with the criteria that the region's task force put together. Obviously, the transportation measure didn't pass last November. And we've done a lot of work to reach out to partners, reach out to business leaders in particular, try to restart the conversation and reconnect with business leaders who ended up opposing the measure, but also reconnect with local leaders and community leaders who supported the measure to understand what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better in thinking about the next conversation about how to fund our region's transportation priorities and Clackamas County's transportation priorities in particular. We heard a lot that it was a really productive, collaborative process. So people supported that the content was very good, that wasn't the issue for most voters and for most of our partners in the process, but that obviously the timing was bad and that there wasn't support for the specific funding mechanism. So we're working deliberately to reach out to many different types of leaders, but business leaders in particular, to restart the conversation around how can we identify the right funding mechanisms to pay for our local transportation needs. Because we know even with increased funding from the federal government and with a growing awareness of the needs for safety improvements, mobility improvements, addressing congestion in the Portland region, that our priorities aren't going to be fully funded by either the federal or state government. And we're going to have to invest in ourselves and identify the right ways to do that. So we're jumping into the process of pulling the conversation around the right funding mechanisms back together. And as we come out of this pandemic, we're looking to put together folks that are interested in being a part of that dialogue. Would love to hear your thoughts about that or about the projects in the transportation measure. But as I said, we're also moving ahead on trying to advance our interests at the federal level, trying to find ways to fund aspects of the very large measure that we were able to put together for last year's ballot, while we rebuild and renew the conversation around the right funding mechanisms to fund our local priorities. With that, I think I will end, and we can move into Q&A unless Council President Peterson or Renata, you want to take it back.
I think it's time for Q&A.
Yes. Thanks to our presenters for a broad-ranging conversation about all that Metro is up to. There are a number of questions. One deals with kind of the evolving role of Metro, and maybe this is a question to Chair Peterson. If we look ahead 10 years from now, what is Metro's vision for the role in the region? And as that role evolves, how would that impact counties and how they interact locally and as a regional partner?
That's a great question. And really, the Metro is a representation of what this region wants us to be, not what we want to be, right? And having been a city councilor, having been a county commissioner and chair of Clackamas County, I can tell you that this is a partnership, and we were asked by the region to consider the affordable housing bond measure and the supportive housing services measure. They were fully supported by the county commissions at that time and many of the city mayors. And so it was not something that came out of our heads. It was a request for help to regionalize these things. And so at a very generic level, my comment back is that when an issue rises to where boundaries have become a problem, such as homelessness, such as affordable housing, where they don't matter anymore, but we need to take it up to the next level to get that fuller picture, we are willing to have that conversation. But it is up to the region, right? The entirety of the region to determine whether that's the right place, whether it's Metro's role or not. We had 4 lines of business going into all of this conversation before housing, right? It was waste management, the venues, the regional park system, and our long-range transportation and land use planning. The regional park system is really an outgrowth of the same kind of conversation around affordable housing, is that there was a need in the communities that was not being met. And that was large tract wildlife conservation, habitat conservation, and protection of large swaths of headwaters that wasn't necessarily recreationally based. So the conversation came out of that, and the region said, we need help and we need to protect these stream corridors. What can we do? What can we do together? And that's where that came from, right? So we don't step into these things unless there's a request, there's a need and a request for us to facilitate and coordinate and really bring everybody together and say, what is the best way?
Great. Well, that leads me into a related question. We're very excited to see the progress on the Newell Creek Canyon Metro Regional Park and wanted to hear a little bit update on that. What is the timing for a grand opening? Maybe remind our citizens about what it entails.
Absolutely. I am so excited for the opening of Newell Creek, and I've been told that it will be an actual in-person set of festivities, and
Great.
not some sort of virtual ribbon cutting, which we've had our fair share of. So I don't have a specific date. I know that we're looking at fall, and we have been able to do a fair bit of work the past few months, and I know that there's some left to do. In particular, we have a lot of access issues to make sure that we square up before opening. We have nature trails. There's visitor amenities. This is going to be a real gem, not only for Oregon City, but for this part of the region. I believe that the opportunity to actually do some recreation will be in place as well. We have really decided that restrooms and picnic tables are things that all of our facilities need, because if people visit, we want to actually make sure that families can enjoy the spot. So look forward to, I guess, more information coming in the fall.
Thank you. So switching over to several questions around transportation. One that's very impactful on our downtown is the bike pedestrian bridge. Maybe step back and talk a little bit about where that project is and where the idea for it came from.
Sure, absolutely. And I was delighted to be part of the table of elected officials. I forget what we were like the political table. But we were able to do a lot of work in a very short amount of time because ODOT had the opportunity to do a concept study. So basically looking at a map and saying, where would bike pedestrian access best benefit these communities, Westland and Oregon City? And particularly that was tied to the fact that we are going to get that new 205 improvement. The Abernathy Bridge will be replaced, and we need to make sure that as we're doing that replacement, bike ped access along that same corridor is maintained or frankly improved. So we had the opportunity to kind of do a sprint. I think the ODOT contract was something like 4 months, and not 4 months, it was short. But we had to move quickly. It was, I think, 3 or 4 meetings. We engaged, and we now have 2 spots on a map that future plans that actually go through design and actually look at areas on the ground can pick up. But this is just the set of kind of very early preliminary pre-design concept plans that are in place. So there's a little bit of a there, and regional and local transportation improvement plans can at least say, here's some potential terminuses. And I am actually very, very impressed by the amount of work we were able to get done. I know not everybody's happy to see 2 places instead of 1, but I think leaving our options open because it's an unfunded project, it's going to happen in the future. And to have 2 alternatives means that depending on how things develop on both sides of the river, we're going to have some choices.
Great. And my understanding is that Arch Bridge had been considered originally as a possibility, but that is no longer on the table.
I don't think it was ever seriously considered. I think ODOT is supposed to give a quote unquote no build alternative to everything that they do. So if asked the question, how does one get across between Lake Oswego and West Lynn without building? The Arch Bridge is the only thing there. That is totally untenable, totally not like a real political future. And ODOT, they live in Salem land a little bit too much. And that was more an academic, here's a potential that solves our checkbox question and not the question of the community, because I've biked the Arch Bridge. I'm a capable but not competent, or competent but not capable biker. And let me tell you, going from OC to Westland is not fun. So why would we even suggest that's the way we want to do it? And frankly, take off the table the only way for people in cars to get back and forth? No.
Right. I know that our business community is very happy to hear that. So thank you. Another transportation question maybe for Mr. Shaw. And maybe it's more of an ODOT-led question, but since Metro is kind of the agency that interacts with them most, it's more about tolling and the general concern that it seems like the Oregon City area might be the only area in the region that's being seriously considered for tolling. And so maybe can you bring us up to speed on that, and what's the sense of timing and why, and a little bit more about that?
Let me just start out with big picture, and then I'll turn it over to Councilor Lewis to zero in on the specifics in Oregon City. But let's just start at the very top. One, at the state level, we all know that the gas tax is losing momentum as we go forward, right? Because of several different reasons. One, it rarely gets increased. It doesn't go up with inflation. And because of more efficient vehicles, we are not bringing in the kind of revenue that we need as a state, not only to operate and maintain our roadways, but to also build new projects or even make tweaks, right, on existing roadways. We don't have that funding source as a stable, long-term funding source. So obviously the state has been looking at a myriad of options of how to do a user fee, which is what a gas tax used to be. The more you use the system, the more you paid in. So the vehicle miles traveled, the rough tough, the road user fee is something that the state is still looking at, but they're also looking at congestion pricing. And that's actually very different on the ground than just a plain old tolling, right? So congestion pricing is how do you actually mitigate demand in a peak period, just like we do with electricity and water. So congestion pricing was actually part of the regional transportation plan in the last go around. It is part of our financial planning for the region and the state of how do we pay for projects going forward, specifically on interstates. And so it has been part and parcel of the regional discussion and the state discussion for some time. Now we're starting to actually see the implementation of it. So Metro went ahead and did basically a quick look at the if we were to implement congestion pricing, what kind of impacts and what kind of benefits could we potentially see within the region? And one of the things that we came out of that with, well, two of the big ones I'll just mention here, and maybe Andy will remind me if I miss one, is that there will be significant diversion, right? And that is one of the things that I experienced having to manage up at WashDOT as Secretary of the Department of Transportation, was how to manage diversion, not just bring in the revenue, right? Not just manage demand, not just have a new project on the interstate, for instance, but how do you actually mitigate the diversion that happens onto what would be with I-205 tolling, McLaughlin and 82nd. Both of those would become diversionary routes, right? So that's the big first thing, is that there would be significant diversion. The second thing is that there would be significant impacts to low-income communities. So we are very keyed into both of those topics and working with the state and the legislature on language that will hopefully be passed by the end of the legislative session to make sure that we're protecting the region in terms of when there is tolling or congestion pricing on our facilities, that money comes back to regionally significant projects on parallel facilities, so that we can make sure that we are protecting our communities as well as still moving traffic efficiently throughout our region. So that's where we stand. We as a region have said through the regional transportation plan, not just the Metro Council, we as a region have said this is a tool in our toolbox. And we wanted to make sure as Metro Council that we gave the information to the localities and to the state. What does that mean once we start doing it? So that's the lens that we're looking at it on, both from the that was the third one, that it does actually have a significant reduction in GHG emissions. But there are other tools that we also looked at in that study that have just as significant impacts. But this is the one that's on the table right now for I-205, I-5, and we're very happy about that. So Councilor Lewis, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I live across the river. I live in Willamette in West Lynn. I am one block off of our main street, and Willamette Falls is already the third lane of 205. and diversion is already happening. I talk about it a lot. You've heard me talk about it before. I am delighted that ODOT has to take diversion seriously now that our congestion pricing model showed a whole bunch of bars and colors, and diversion on roadway pricing being a big red bar. So the intuitive, we know it because we've seen it, doesn't always work for transportation planners. They need it in the model. We've served up the model. So I'm happy that ODOT has to take it seriously. The other thing that Metro's been able to move the needle on is the fact that we were going to be the only guinea pig. We now have ODOT saying that if they're going to put a price on the roads, they can't just play around and experiment with us here in Oregon City, Gladstone, West Lynn, and they need to go in tandem with I-5. That has broader policy implications, but we absolutely need to address how we pay for these services as a system, and we are not a guinea pig. And I do think that there is a future in which we have the infrastructure at 205 to the place that we need it. And then we can have the conversation very specifically about what services are we paying for. I don't think we can put a price on the road until there is an alternative on how to use that road. And right now we don't have any. I can get on a bus that comes every 58 minutes, 4 or 5 days a week. And I cannot leave my office at Metro any later than about 5:10 p.m. and still make it home via transit. So we don't have viable alternatives. And until we do, there needs to be a way to use that road, paying only the base amount through gas tax or whatever replaces the gas tax for the basic infrastructure. So we have a lot of work to do. The conversation at the state level was one of convenience, which was 205 is important. It costs the least of the three projects in the 2017 bill. So let's let them make up their funding gap by a toll. I believe the legislature, particularly because we have good advocates from our part of the region who are willing to grab onto this thing and say ODOT actually needs to be taking direction from the legislature on this. And it's not just ODOT in a black box making decisions, because we have the fewest options. And we have the fewest options because we've made some choices in the past down here as a region that maybe we shouldn't be particularly proud of. But we absolutely cannot use that as an excuse to not defend ourselves and make better choices going forward.
Thank you so much for your advocacy on that and lending that voice of reality, that everyday experience that we all are concerned about, with that prospect of tolling.
Yeah.
So
if I may just also
yes,
add,
of course,
Councilor Lewis, just a bit of the historical perspective of Clackamas County. We were not included in the I-5 Columbia River crossing conversation. And so it was a very difficult conversation to have back, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were having it about tolling and congestion pricing on I-5, but not I-205. And the rationale was that the diversion would have been onto I-205 and it would have shut down access to our industrial area. It would have shut down access through I-84, I-205 interchange, and would have shut down access to the actual airport. So being able to have both these things go forward and get benefits for both communities that live along those two corridors is really important. And it will balance out our system and not have the direct negative impacts that only congestion pricing on I-5 would have.
Okay, switching topics now to the Metro transfer station. We understand that the current site, of course, is really constrained and that Metro has looked at options in the Clackamas industrial area. There's also potential redevelopment at that site should the transfer station move, water quality, environmental quality concerns. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about your thinking on that, any kind of time frame, what goes into your decision about moving the transfer station.
Great, thank you so much. And I framed up the problem statement earlier just because I think it is really important to recognize it's kind of core to my work. We are in the stage of still site searching. We have a purchase and sale agreement of a site on Jennifer Street in unincorporated Clackamas, kind of near where the Fred Meyer Distribution Center is. And we are doing a set of studies and due diligence there, but our eyes are also wide open to other sites. That Jennifer Street site ranked in the tops, I think it was number 6, but definitely in the top 10 of sites that we surveyed just based on kind of zoning and map location alone. Our staff put together basically a list of every single parcel that's in Clackamas County on the northeast side that is zoned appropriately. And we are looking for a willing seller. So we have to look for either what's on the market or what somebody willingly would sell. This is not an eminent domain project. So that's kind of got us in a real limited spot in terms of what we're looking at, which is why we're looking at the Jennifer Street site, because it does offer a lot of good opportunities, and it does have some challenges. The topography there is challenging. And I also think that there's a transportation challenge, frankly. The Jennifer Street is not improved to the point we would need it to be. And we have already some severe congestion on that east-west corridor. I do look forward to further conversation on Metro South in particular, because I think there are opportunities to potentially split some of the services. We serve both residential and commercial, or I say residential, but what I really mean is self-haul. And that includes some commercial as well. So when you have a contractor come to your house and they leave, even though they're a commercial service, they use what's called self-haul. So there's a whole range of folks using the site, everybody from me and my Subaru with 100 pounds of debris to the commercial haulers who do your pickup at 6 a.m. in the alley. They don't all need to be served at the same site. So there is a potential, I think, that we can split some of those services, but also recognize there are services of the future that we need to be planning for. We want to make sure it's a community asset. Right now, we do great work through our community enhancement grants, which we actually just had our community enhancement grant meeting last week in Oregon, 2 weeks ago in Oregon City. So I'm proud of the work that Metro's already done to make sure that we're a good partner in community. But there's more innovation we can do there to make our sites truly serve the community, both in terms of workforce, but also public access to the space. Modern transfer stations can contain smell and sound in a way that, we could really make sure that community is in need of or a parklet or even a basketball hoop, that sort of thing, that can go on site. So I want to be eyes wide open if people have ideas, opportunities, or even just thoughts on how to make the Jennifer Street site, which is a little bit further east, more accessible. I'm all ears. My staff is all ears.
It may be a little bit further from Oregon City, but it would be more accessible for the folks in Happy Valley and the town center area. So it will serve maybe a broader region a little bit more equitably. Okay, we do have a question from Roseanne Johnson about annexation. It said, just this month, Oregon City adopted increasingly discretionary annexation code. Additionally, the city's website indicates annexations will still be voter approved despite the 2016 Senate bill which prohibits voter approved annexation for qualified land. Finally, the majority of the territory that can be annexed to Oregon City has a residential or mixed use comprehensive plan zone. What do you see as Metro's role in encouraging Oregon City to remove barriers to annexation for land for future housing and jobs, if any?
Well, I think our formal role is minimal, but I think that the opportunity to have good, well-planned development really works better in cities. If I were to identify the largest part of my district, it's actually the urban center that is unincorporated Clackamas County, and hearing what those residents want and need and how some of them might be better served in residential community by having that layer of government that is city services. I'm an advocate for making sure that we're doing our planning in a city context. Then again, I have no formal role here, so I just gave my opinion without any chips to cash.
And
Sounds
I
good.
would just add on to that, that the Metro's role is in helping communities with their development. So whether that's through the transportation, whether that's through our economic recovery 5-year plan, or whether that's through just technical assistance, right? So we are here to provide any necessary technical assistance and help with lobbying and funding to be able to develop these areas into complete communities, right? That we want to move beyond just single family miles and miles and miles, but we actually want to provide complete communities to folks. So whatever we can do to help with that and make those communities integrate with existing neighborhoods, I think, we're there to help.
Great. Appreciate that. Another question, which may not be directly related to Metro, but is kind of a regional concern. How do you think the continued protests and lack of resolve to get them to stop is hurting the Portland area and the region? And maybe that's to you, Lynn.
So I think what we need to start out with is that the protests that started back during the pandemic with the killing of George Floyd, with Black Lives Matter, has nothing to do with the damage and that downtown Portland has seen throughout the entirety of this conversation. The damage is really through those folks that are hiding underneath what is a legitimate march situation in terms of being able to say, yes, Black Lives Matter, right? So I think we need to distinguish that there's two very different groups, and those folks are still showing up in downtown, but less and less is happening, and you hear less and less about it. And I think as more people come into downtown and as businesses open up, we will start to hear less and less about it. And I think that I was just talking to somebody the other day. When we look back at the protests of the 70s, Portland didn't, there were protests here, legitimate protests, but they did not come to the fruition that we saw in other places, including my hometown of Madison, where people died, right? And I think what we saw here is this, that similar that similar moment where we are all coming to recognize a lot of things that are wrong in our society, and it's been a good conversation to start thinking about how there are so many barriers that we have set up for individuals to succeed, no matter what political spectrum we're talking about. There are just barriers that need to be broken down all over the place. And whatever Metro can do to encourage democracy and empower people in their decision making and bring folks to the table that have not been able to get to the table, that's where we're going to be. But in terms of downtown opening for business, we are working as a very close partner with the city of Portland on both the homelessness issue with the supportive housing services and our regional illegal dumping program. We are going from 2 teams to 6 to possibly 8 teams. And that means, having been chair of Clackamas County has had illegal dumping problems for a very long time. And I came onto the commission when Commissioner Kennemer and Commissioner Schrader and Commissioner Soa had set up a program, right, to be able to deal with illegal dumping. And Metro has had a very small but program for a very long time that has been able to keep up with the regional issues until this pandemic. And I just want to make it very clear to folks that the homeless issue and regional illegal dumping are actually 2 separate topics. What's happening right now is that folks are using the homeless encampments as a place to dump their stuff. And so when that starts to happen and a place starts to look like it's an illegal dump, more people will illegally dump. And that happens when we have poverty in our region and they can't afford to actually go to the South Transfer Station. They can't afford their monthly garbage rates. This starts to happen. And so we have grown our program, but we weren't actually able to do it during the pandemic because we had relied on incarcerated labor. The Multnomah County Jail was obviously not letting anybody out of jail because there was a COVID issue within jails and prisons. So we have actually morphed during the pandemic to a workforce initiative away from incarcerated labor, both because we can't count on that labor, but really because Reimagine Oregon, that's led by Black leaders, asked us to. So we are moving to a workforce initiative that will actually give people the skills to move on to other jobs. So we're very proud of that that move and looking forward to being part and parcel of cleanup in this region.
It sounds like things are moving forward in a positive direction, slowly but surely, with everybody working together. So that's great news. We've reached the end of our questions, so I'd like to return the conversation to Chris Story to conclude our discussion today. Chris?
And here I am. Thank you. I had to rapidly click that unmute button. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I actually have to admit I have a selfish follow-up question before we end, if you don't mind. I live fairly close to Newell Creek, and I'm to see that project. What is Metro's strategy for dealing with the houselessness challenge that has been impacting that area to make sure that it's a safe environment for folks to be able to use it? By the way, we also have some questions that will pop up. People can just click and answer that, and then we'll be able to share out the polling results at the end of the meeting.
Question. We can't vote. You didn't allow us to vote.
We thought this might be useful feedback for you.
I appreciate that.
So I'll speak a little bit to the houseless population at Newell Creek. There's a couple of issues that all come into play at once at Newell Creek based on the geography of the site. One is that we absolutely have to make sure that the kind of fire precautions are first and foremost in our minds, because that area with the dryness and its heavily wooded nature is potentially dangerous. But at the same time, we have to meet people with compassion. And while there are services coming online, there's not enough adequate supply of safe places for folks to go. So I'm really excited that Clackamas County will be getting, I believe it's 100 new shelter beds online with supportive housing services measure. So when we have good places for people to go, it's easier to help people get out of where they are. The other piece is in managing that property. Not all of what looks like Newell Creek is our area, and some of it is ODOT and some of it is private. And I believe that there are folks who are clued into that on site and can conveniently be on the wrong side of the property line for whomever they're talking to ask them to move along. So there's several issues at play, but one, most importantly, we have to meet people with compassion. And there's absolutely a shortage of good alternatives right now in Clackamas County. And I'm really glad Metro stepped up to help fix that problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And since I'm being selfish, I'll just go all the way and be a little selfish. And I had one other question. When do you expect to do the next review of the UGB?
So we're in mid-cycle review right now. We have mid-cycle review for the first time, actually, because of some state legislation. And so we have two cities that are kind of courting us with their application. And we will, I believe, have our process wrapped up mid-cycle within the next, supposed to be by like early next year. So then we'll be back on track for another, is it 3 years from now, to be back on track for the full cycle.
2024 is the next moment at which we need to conclude an urban growth cycle. So the whole population forecast, employment forecast, and deep engagement with our partners and you all to talk about growth needs and then making a decision by the end of 24.
Just
My
on,
math is right.
just on a last note, we're supposed to start a reboot of Metro 2040 growth concept this last year, and obviously during a pandemic, who wants to talk about a 50-year growth plan? No one. So we focused on the 5-year economic recovery plan, but as we move forward, we're going to have that conversation about where we're going as a region again, because so much has changed since when we created Metro 2040 20 years ago. Nobody anticipated automated vehicles. Climate change was not really a part of our conversation back then. We could go on and on and on. Racial equity was not a part of our conversation back then. So, right, we're going to have a really robust conversation going forward, not just about where we move the urban growth boundary over 5-year periods, but where are we going as a region so that we make sure that we're headed in the right direction with each incremental move that we make. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic presentation. We especially appreciate Council President Peterson of you joining us from the other side of the state while in an Airstream. I don't mean to out you, but I appreciate your commitment to public service. It's quite marvelous. Thank you for sharing your updates. Certainly our region is facing some significant challenges, and there are lots of voices out there with different ideas about how to address them. As we saw from the quick polling that we did there, I would say there's not a consensus, at least among this group, about the best way to do that. So an inclusive process and making sure everyone's voices is heard is certainly important, and we appreciate you being here to share with our community. We are also very cognizant that Metro plays a very significant role with a lot of projects that are right here in Oregon City and crucial to Clackamas County as a whole. The I-205 widening is certainly a topic that everyone thinks about every time they go for a drive. The Willamette Falls Riverwalk project, the relocation of Metro South and the potential impact on the north end of Oregon City, the UGB, and how to manage the cost of housing, because certainly I now have kids that are entering the workforce and they're still living at home. I'll just say that right now. So anything you can do to help that out would be appreciated. But don't tell them I said that. So thank you so much. We appreciate everyone's participation in the forum today. For all of our attendees, I'll note that as you're making your summer plans, please set aside July 27th for our next forum. We'll be hosting members of the state legislature, and they'll be sharing their perspective on the just about to close legislative session that's happening right now. And they'll be sharing a report on bills that passed, bills that didn't pass, and what it all means. So we look forward to seeing you then. Stay cool as best you can, stay hydrated, and because of a story you may or may not have heard, try to conserve water if you can. Always a good idea. And with that, thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and have a great day.